Thank you for coming. For the Love of Life podcast, it's us here again together. Or for the first time, like I said last time, but if you weren't here last time, for the first time. My name's Latea. This is for the Love of Life podcast. Today's guest episode is with Seibo Shen. He's a self-mastery coach who teaches people how to leverage the laws of the universe and understand the non-physical elements of reality. He likes to use quantum physics as his means of explanation. So that's exciting. And yeah, he's pretty devoted to helping people live a more joyous, prosperous, abundant, fun, meaningful life. And those are all things that I am also about. So of course he's on my podcast. And my podcast is your podcast. So enjoy.
Cool. So welcome to For the Love of Life podcast, Seibo.
I love it. Yeah. Thank you, Latea.
Thank you. And shout out to Theo for setting this up. So that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely shout out to Theo.
How do you know him?
Very interesting. So I met Theo at this thing called Flow Fam, and Flow Fam was something that we used to go to every Fridays during the pandemic. And Flow Fam is it's like a Zoom call, but the guy that does Flow Fam, he teaches you how to freestyle rap in 90 minutes. So yeah, the next time you see Theo, have him do a freestyle rap for you. So it's really cool. It's really cool. He just teaches people how to get into flow states. And, whether it's flow states for freestyling or flow states for jiu-jitsu, it's all one and the same, being present, not being distracted. And so that's how I met Theo. He was just a really funny, interesting guy. And we talked about being fathers quite a bit, so we really connected over being fathers. And at that time, I wouldn't say I was an atheist, but I wasn't like spiritually inclined, and he was always talking about Christianity, things of that nature. And I think it was a time where I was just kind of like open to a lot of different things that I wasn't open to before. I had gone to Catholic school, and there was a lot of hypocrisy that I saw at my Catholic school, so it kind of turned me off to like religion and spirituality for a while. But I think the pandemic woke up a lot of people, including myself. So sharing that space with Theo, being in flow together, talking about different topics that maybe weren't part of my usual day-to-day conversations. It was really great to just have that conversation, open up about spirituality, open up about being fathers, and really being able to connect on various things. So yeah, and then he connected us together. So, the joy of being his friend has continually given me a lot of positive benefit into my life.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a really good egg. Feels great. Okay, so I only just recently started following you because I only recently was, exposed to who you are. But you've been talking a lot about going from being an atheist to having like a spiritual understanding, and you've kind of come to this understanding through quantum physics. Is that what has secured it? Or just tell me about that whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to being a meditation and manifestation coach, I had worked in the cannabis industry. I had run actually my three of my own companies, and my approach to cannabis was also very scientific in that it was all about cannabinoid science, the endocannabinoid system, which terpenes, which flavonoids are affecting and modulating the effect that you got. So I had this plant medicine ceremony with my wife in July of 2020. And in the plant medicine ceremony, it said, Seibo, it's time to stop being a cannabis entrepreneur. It's time to be a coach. And I was like, I don't really know about coaching. The only coach I knew was Tony Robbins, or my jiu-jitsu coach. So I knew it wasn't to coach jiu-jitsu. And so what was shown to me was study quantum physics, study quantum physics. So I started studying quantum physics, started looking at things like wave particle duality, quantum entanglement, superposition, things of that nature. And having gone to Catholic school, and my parents are Buddhists, and my best friend growing up was Jewish. So I understood a lot of these religions at least at a high level, and understood they had things like we are all one, things of that nature, or like God is fundamental. And so as I started going through quantum physics, like superposition is very much similar to like, we are all one, or everything everywhere all at once. And I started realizing that the previous framework I thought was like, we had the Big Bang, and after the planet started forming, and we had single cell organisms start developing into multicellular organisms. And then all of a sudden, once it got complex enough, consciousness arose out of that. And so I always thought that's pretty weird. Like all of the scientists, they seem to unanimously agree like the Big Bang theory is correct. But then at some point, magic happens, which is life comes out of non-life. No scientist has been able to replicate that, but no one seems to question that part. And so I stumbled upon a professor named Donald Hoffman out of UC Irvine, and he has a theory called conscious realism. And he says that if you grant him that consciousness is fundamental, not that space-time is fundamental, he has all of these mathematical algorithms and equations that show us how we get from the Big Bang into how we evolved into humans. And so a lot of what he says, if you listen very closely, is that when he talks about consciousness being fundamental, he's more or less saying God is fundamental. And if you can grant him that God or consciousness is fundamental, he could show you the math of how we evolved and got here. And so I really got attracted to that, because every scientific theory, you have to grant them at least one assumption. So he's saying that the magic happens in chapter 1. There's already life. Whereas he says most of the reductionist physicalist scientists who believe in the Big Bang theory, the magic happens in chapter 4, but everyone seems to ignore like that magic happening. So because he has math to back up his theory, for me as a logical, rational minded person, I was like, all right, cool. Now someone has math to show like there's something more than our 5 senses can detect. And when you have math, it's really hard for logical, rational people to deny that, because if they deny the math, then you have to deny a lot of these other things that math has been able to prove. And that's why I believe science and spirituality is coming to an intersection, and that quantum physics is the modern language. In the past, whether it was Buddhism or Hinduism or Catholicism or Christianity, there's a lot of stories and parables. And I do believe like there is some truth and validity to those stories, but I believe like those stories and parables were required to explain the mystical, the spiritual to people that didn't have the current framework of understanding that we have today, which is logical, rational, like scientific driven. So in today's society, I believe that this type of modern language is what is going to help people that were just like me, rational and logical, be open to the spiritual, be open to the mystical, be open to all that is, and be able to connect to something greater than themselves.
Yeah. And if that was a lot. There was so many things. Hold on. So first of all, can you clarify for me, what is superposition?
Yes. So superposition is the state that let's just say an atom or molecule is in before there's an observer. And so before there is an observer, they say that the molecule or the atom exists in this superposition state, which is it's everywhere all at once. And it's only when the human or when a conscious being observes it that it collapses from a waveform into a single point in time. So maybe an easier way to explain this is, I don't know who your audience is, but I come from a 10th planet school, so there's a lot of like cannabis and plant medicine talk. And anyone who's tried, let's say, plant medicines and have waved like their hand in front of their face, they may see trails. And my previous understanding of the trails was just like, oh wait, there's like the way our eyes are taking in the light, it's just like kind of like leaving like a trail of like that hand. But when you start understanding quantum physics, that these things are existing in multiple positions or everywhere all at once until you collapse it into like this single hand, is that you start understanding when you do this and you see the trails, you're actually seeing like the superposition of all the different positions where your hand can be. And so one of the things that I've come to understand is that I've been able to reach psychedelic states through meditation, but without psychedelics, I wouldn't have been able to understand that there were these higher levels of consciousness to reach. So I believe that psychedelics are a portal into higher levels of consciousness that allow you to experience what objective reality is more like. And what we know is we see less than 0.0001% of the light spectrum. And whether it's sounds, whether it's light, like we see very little of like what's actually out there. And so when people talk about like these visions or they're seeing things during psychedelics, I used to think, oh, these are just exogenous molecules we took into our body. There's some sort of chemical reaction and we're having these visions. Now I truly believe that what we're actually seeing are the layers of reality that are invisible to us. And the best analogy that I could use is like all the radio stations that are in my area, they coexist. Like they're all over me right now, but depending on what station my radio tuners tuned into, that I'll either get hip hop music or country music or electronic dance music, right? But all of those stations are existing like parallel to each other all at the same time. And what was shown to me in my deep meditations is reality is also like that. So those that live in a pro-vaccine world experience a pro-vaccine world. Those that live in an anti-vaccine world live in an anti-vaccine world. And how is it that we inhabit this planet, but we have two such different worlds? It's what frequency are you dialed into? And that's the frequency that you experience. So a lot of what I've been doing is how do I broaden the frequency band of my brain so that I could tap into all of these other frequencies? And I used to live in San Francisco, super progressive place. Now I live in Sacramento, very conservative place. And I could see that like, yeah, literally they are on different frequency bands. And so what I do in this new area is I alter my frequency so that I can experience what they're experiencing. And then when I alter my frequency and I could see things through their lens, instead of thinking, oh, these people are narrow-minded or racist or whatever people would say about conservative people where I used to be from, I could see that no, they just have a completely different view of reality. And if you could see things the way they see things, you'd probably act the same. And so because of being able to do this, I start realizing that like my place in the world is not to tell people what's right or wrong. My place in the world is to show that all realities coexist at the same time. And if you get better at seeing all of these realities, then it will no longer be a world of I'm right, you're wrong. It's more of a reality of how can we coexist together and allow all of these differences to really expand consciousness so that we could all be living in joy, purpose, and abundance.
Amazing. That's the entire reason that I made this podcast was because of that, recognizing that we all have a different reality and that we can come together and share what it's like for us and be exposed to that. And instead of like butting heads and being like, no, this is the truth or this is the truth, we're like, oh, holy shit. So just recognizing that both are equally real. And yeah. And I struggle with words but we're doing a podcast anyways.
Yeah. Well, you're doing great. And like to me, jujitsu is like the best analogy for this. It's like, well, what's the right way to do a lion killer? What's the right way to enter, 50-50 or whatever, I mean, there's like infinite ways to where the fulcrum point is, where you're choking someone, how you're bending their arm, and depending on your body type, depending on, the thickness of your joints, like there's all these like little nuances. And I believe like life is the same way, which is like, if you want to say like one technique is best, well, try that same technique on, the technique that you're choking me with on my skinny neck is not the same technique that you would need to be effective with someone that is like Brock Lesnar, right? And so what is true? Well, what's true is dependent on, it's contextual to what you're doing. And that's why I love coaching people that have done jujitsu, because to me, jujitsu analogies are like so great for life. And you could kind of explain a lot of these concepts of like, yeah, well, if you think it's black and white, well, go try to do that same move on someone with a different body type. And you'll see that what you think is true is actually, it's true in a certain context, but not true in another context.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we can be inspired by other people's skills or specialities, but it's not necessarily best if we try to copy it. You know, like my fiance, for instance, is like over 200 pounds, huge, strong. I'm going to have a different game than he's going to have in jiu-jitsu, because I like when we start standing, he'll just like arms down, walk into people and wait for them to wrestle him, because he's so confident in his ability to defend. And also he's so strong, you know? So it's just, he's like walking into a brick wall. If I try to do that, sometimes I'll try to do that to him. I'll just like walk up to him and he'll literally like touch me gently and I'm off balance. I'm like, okay, so not the same approach. Yeah. And I
I'll
think
tell you,
yeah.
I'll tell you that is the most intimidating thing, is when I'm standing across from someone and then they're walking at me like with their hands down, and then I'm like, all right, it's time to pull guard, like I don't want to stand with this person because they're probably a wrestler, or they just know takedowns or takedown defense like so much better than me.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, this is definitely a trap, 100%. Oh man. Yeah. And jiu-jitsu, I like that you have a lot of different ways to tie that into what you teach. But for me, the most prominent thing is the path of least resistance. That's really, that's all jiu-jitsu is it's like finding your way through this path. And you don't want to like try to force anything. The more that you try to resist something, the harder it becomes for you. And yeah. Okay, hold on. But I want to backpedal, because there was several things that you said. First of all, one thing that I was like, what? So your parents are Buddhist, but you went to Catholic school?
Yes.
How did that
Yes.
happen?
We lived in San Francisco. I had a penchant of wanting to do things that my parents didn't want me to do. So they had heard from other parents like, hey, like your kid will learn a lot of discipline if you take them to Catholic school. So I think in my parents' eyes, there's religion and then there's education, and education will like trump religion. And so it was just really interesting being in Catholic school. I mean, there wasn't anything like I would say was bad, but there were definitely a lot of things that I could see like that's a little bit hypocritical, And so I think as a young person that loved to be right all the time, because I didn't want to be in school, so I just kept on thinking of like different reasons as to why whatever they were doing was not in alignment with what source would want us to be doing, And so I was very anti-religion for a large portion of my life, just because I felt like so many of the wars were religious wars. All the wars that I read about had to come down to religion. And then when I realized like every president is like a Christian or a Catholic, I can't remember which one it was. I was like, whoa, I was like, oh, even the governments are just run by religion, So I kind of got disconnected from that idea. But once I started meditating, and so when my wife and I did that plant medicine ceremony in July of 2020, I just started meditating every day for 90 minutes, And I started getting connected with God. That's the best way that I could put it. At first, I thought it was just voices in my head. And then I was like scared to tell people about the voices that I was hearing. Then I started going, well, these are all like very like inclusive, empathetic, warm, loving things that it's asking me to do. It wasn't telling me to like go kick the dog or anything. It was like, hey, go say hello to these people, or make some videos on unity, right? So it was just like all of this like really like warm, loving, empathetic, inclusive type thoughts. And I kept it to myself for a while, because being a cannabis entrepreneur, if I told people I was hearing voices, like my closest friends all thought like, oh man, Seibo smoked way too much weed, ate too many mushrooms, like his biochemistry is thrown off and he's having like these flashbacks, right? But it got to a point where, as I was meditating every day, like I just knew who I was communing with was God, or the highest instantiation of our oversouls, and that whatever I was receiving, it didn't matter what other people believe. What mattered is that I knew it was true. And I like to talk about like there's 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 understanding, there's believing, and then there's knowing, you know. And when you're understanding and believing things, it requires like an intellectual process to like, you know, like, hey, if you want to do a triangle, put your foot here, wrap your leg around there. And it's like this intellectual understanding. When you get to the knowing is, you know, what my wife would call like intuition. It's just like, you know, it's time to turn left. You know, it's time to quit your job. And it got to the point, like, you know, the story that I share is on July 14th of 2021, you know, we drove through this conservative town that we live in now. By July 30th, we had sold our home. And by October 21st, we were starting to live here. And it's been like the best decision that we've ever made. But, you know, that's kind of like where I tell people the power of knowing is that, like, I didn't need to know that this place had these types of schools or this place had these types of political views. It was just like, once we drove through, my wife and I knew this is the place for us. We sold our home. We didn't have to like question anything. And being a rational, logical thinker, you know, a data-driven person, it was very counter to my kind of like core being, you know. But one thing that I realized was I've been able to achieve a lot by just pure effort, pure grit, denying like when I was tired, denying when I was hungry, denying when I was stressed out. So now when I just listen to the signals in my body, I realize like emotions, feelings, you know, like people will say facts don't care about your feelings. And to me, that's the dumbest thing ever, because what is the human experience if not feelings, you know, like
yeah,
it's all based on that.
Yeah.
You know, so I started seeing that my rational, logical way of thinking could produce the results that I wanted. But the journey to get those results was always like grinding, being stressed out, stressing out my family. And then when I just followed source energy, you know, like things would just play out in a way that was always beneficial. And you talked about the path of least resistance. I noticed that this was a path of least resistance. And that doesn't mean I didn't have any obstacles or challenges that came up, but instead of viewing them as problems, I just looked at them as a challenge. And now I just look at them as gifts. You know, there are no problems. They're all gifts that just lead to more expansion. You know, just like when you get tapped out and you don't know what that move was. Oh shit, that was a buggy choke. What was that? You're like, oh shit, it's a gift. You know, it's a gift. Now I understand, you know, how to do a buggy choke and how to defend a buggy choke.
Yeah. And to be aware of this thing that could be a threat that maybe you didn't know existed before.
Exactly. You think you're in a dominant position and all of a sudden you're tapping.
You think you're safe and you're not. Totally. The plant medicine that you took in 2020, what was it?
We took psilocybin mushrooms.
Did you do like a heavy dose?
Yeah, we did 7 grams each.
Damn.
Yeah.
I've yet to do that. I think I'm maxed out at 5, but 7 probably would have been better because I was like teetering on the edge.
Well, I feel like, you know, I'm of the belief now that I'm a little bit more agnostic to the actual amount, in that if I take like a half gram now, I could get to that same place as the 7 grams. And so I started viewing these as like permission slips, you know, like when I took 7 grams, you know, like someone had told me like I would see God for sure. You know, so in my mind, I was like, all right, this is a big enough dose where I'm just going to blast through. And so I had that intention, I had that belief. But now that I have that same intention and belief, and as I was telling you, I've been meditating 90 minutes a day, was like, yeah, I started realizing, oh, okay, this is the path that I need to get there. This is how I need to breathe. This is how I need to relax. This is how I need to let go. And once I developed that protocol, you know, I've been able to have basically transcendent experiences literally every morning. And that's why when I tell people, when they ask me, how is your day going? I say, it's the best day of my life, because every day I start off with 90 minutes of communing with my higher self or God, or, you know, typically I just use language that doesn't trigger people. But yeah, if they were to ask me, well, who are you communing with? Then I'd say God, you know, like that's how I can be so confident about what I'm doing every day and not worry if like the external world is showing me the types of results that I think I should be seeing, because I just have surrendered to become a vessel, and just knowing that as the vessel, whatever happens is a synchronistic event for me to either learn from, to grow from, or to help someone else. And it's been such an easy framework to live life this way where, like I said, I was a very active overthinker. And I'm really into neurophysiology. So here's one thing that I think your listeners will really attach themselves to is our brain weighs anywhere from 2.5 to 3 pounds. So depending on your weight, it could be anywhere from 2 to 5% of your body weight, but it uses anywhere from 30 to 50% of all of the ATP that your mitochondria produces. So when you think about jujitsu and all the energy that you exert during jujitsu, yeah, you could exert just as much by being an overthinker, if not more. So I started realizing like all of my yeah. So when I think about all of my friends that are hyperachievers, and like they're tired all the time, I started realizing, oh, it's because they just think all the time. And this is not to say thinking is not a good thing, because we all need to think critically. But when you become an overthinker and get trapped in your head, you just start burning a lot of fuel. And that's why a lot of people that change their diet, get rid of the energy vampires, start working out, they don't get their energy back because they're just overactive thinkers. And that's part of the reason why I became a coach, was that I started seeing that, like, as I started downloading this information from Source Energy, I could see that like there were certain interpretations of what was happening in our biochemistry where people were misinterpreting what was happening. So as you can imagine, like when I start speaking, I go off on like these long tangents. So every single new doctor I see like says, Seibo, do you have ADHD or have you been diagnosed for ADHD? So when I meditated on that, I was like, is ADHD real? Because my cousins and family in China, there's no such thing as ADHD there, like they're like, that's a thing. And so what was shown to me was, no, well, you think of this kid as not being able to focus and you want to sit them down in the class and make them focus. But if you looked at it as, this is God's way of showing you what you truly love and what your purpose is, because everyone that has ADHD, when they find something that they like, they could hyper focus. So instead, we're just giving people Ritalin, Adderall to focus on things that aren't in alignment with what their spirit and soul wants. And so once I got that answer by connecting to Source Energy, like, yeah, so if I have to talk to physicians, clinicians about this topic, like I have 100% confidence that, yeah, you may have all this data that like shows you like why it's effective and people are neurodivergent, but I know that I'm getting my information from a higher source than where you're getting your information on. And, I mean, this could even go into like depression and things of that level. If it was just serotonin or dopamine deficiencies, then if you give them more serotonin and dopamine, they would be good. But they're not good after that, And so I know a lot of what I'm saying could be triggering to people that, suffer from this. But I always say, like, look, if you think it's a chemical issue, then you'll be dependent on the chemicals. If you're open to what I'm saying, and I've coached 188 people up until this point over the last 2 years, 185 of them were able to overcome whatever challenge that they had. And not all of them were ADD or depressed, but this is just to say, like, if you're open to the possibility, there is a path there. Just like if you're open to the possibility of a different path of putting on a choke, you will find that different path.
Yeah, and the thing with the mental illness and all these diagnoses that I think is so strange is that, so say they diagnose you with ADHD or with clinical depression. Now you've marked this as like a tag or part of your identity, and it seems something that's permanent. So now you'll be taking maybe medication for years, or say you got diagnosed at 15, you're 35, you still believe you have this thing. But why is it that every other aspect of you changes? And I've always kind of laugh at it when I look at myself and reflect from like the time I was a teenager up until now. I've never sought any sort of diagnosis, but over different periods of time, if I went in and asked someone for what they would label me with, there could be so many different things, because in different stages of my life, I've had different struggles, or tendencies, and because all the data would suggest that you have an anxiety disorder, or you have ADHD, or you have, get out of here, or you have whatever it is. I just think, yeah, I'm totally with you in that boat, that yeah, that it doesn't stop there. Like, yeah, you can use these terms to describe the symptoms that people are having, but like you're saying, like if it was the problem was that your neurotransmitters were off balance, if you just add more of them, that the problem would be solved, but it's not. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And just to preface what I was saying, I do believe that there are people with biochemical issues where these things could absolutely help. Like, so I do see some value to them, but I do also see like there's a lot of dependency. I see the success rates of these things, and it's not very high, and even the people that are functional on it, if you ask them, like, how are things going? It's like, well, better than before, but it's not great. And I believe that like we all are all able to achieve greatness, and just like I gave that example of like there's no one in China that has ADHD, and this is not to say that they don't have that biochemical feeling in their body of feeling distracted and things of that nature, but this is just to say that because they didn't put a label on it, people aren't identifying with it. And I mean, there's tons of examples like this, like in Tahitian culture, they don't have a word for sad. The closest word they have for sad is how you feel after recovering from like a long flu, kind of like down and kind of cloudy headed. So as you can imagine, because they don't have a definition of it, they don't have like people that are clinically depressed. Now that the same sets of neurotransmitters may be happening in their body, they're just not identifying it with that word. And so my coach, his name is Michael Neal, he talks about his depression quite a bit. And what's really interesting is, so he's in his 60s right now, and he said in up till his 50s, he always saw the depression as like this like problem in his life that would happen like every 5 or 6 years. And so he did what most people did, worked out, changed his diet, slept better, had better work-life balance. And it was like shortening the time between or shortening the time that he was actually depressed. He would be depressed like 2 months every 4 or 5 years is the way he describes it. Then in his 60s, he started taking a different approach, which was, I'm not going to look at this as a problem. I'm just going to look at it as like every 5 years, my biochemistry seems to shift. And so he just allowed himself to feel what he needed to feel without putting a label on it. And he said that like his bouts of depression were like only 2 weeks instead of 2 months. And so I was like, wow, this is fascinating. So I started meditating on this. And so what was communicated to me was that in different civilizations, okay, I know this is going to start getting a little bit kooky sounding, but I'm just going to say it anyways, is in different civilizations outside of Earth, depression is actually called compression. And the reason why it's called compression is that you've done your best looking outwards for answers, asking your mentors, asking your friends, asking your family, and you're not able to find the answer. So you go within to find the answer. You withdraw from other people. Except when we see people withdraw from other people, we're like, hey, there goes Latea. She's not being social. She's not coming to jujitsu. She's keeping to herself. Let's cheer her up. Let's, do whatever is necessary. So when people are in that state and they see everyone reacting to them like there's something wrong with them, of course they start sensing that, and it exacerbates. And so what was shown to me was like, no, this is like your way of understanding that your truest answers are within you. And if you could see like depression or compression is actually a good thing, because you're no longer looking for external validation or external answers, you're finding your truth, then we would look at depression or compression not as a negative thing that requires everyone in your family or tribe to be helping you, but it's like, yeah, just leave them alone, let them process, acknowledge like it's okay. And so, this was independent of like what Michael Neal was talking about. But when Michael Neal described what he was talking about, like this, I was like, this is exactly what I was shown. Was like, he didn't look at it as a problem. Just like, hey, some chemicals in my body are reacting in a way that makes me feel less than normal right now. It's not a problem. Then it just came and went. He was able to process and come up with whatever answers he needed.
Yeah, you allow yourself to feel it and experience it rather than trying so hard to understand or make sense of it or fight it or make it go away. And then things just kind of come and go with ease. So that's very nice. Quickly jumping back to the idea of religion. So was it your upbringing in the Catholic school that kind of made you reject the idea of God? Because for myself, I wasn't brought up. I never went to church as a kid. I didn't go to a religious school or anything, and had like very little exposure to religion. But then once I did kind of meet people who had, say, like Catholic parents or grandparents, and I would the general vibe that I got from it was that I was like, oh, not for me. Like a lot of rules, a lot of like rigidity, and it just didn't make any sense to my understanding of like the world. And so I rejected God pretty hard. And then I feel like it's humorous because people who are quite strict with their religion a lot of the time wouldn't dare like even smoke weed or never mind taking mushrooms or dabbling with any sort of substance. But then it was, experimenting with plant medicine that actually directly connected me to God. And I'm like, isn't this hilarious? Because, maybe these people will try so hard to convince you to accept God into your life and through their lens, right? They're like, this is how I learned God and know God, and this is how you should take this path. And then it didn't make any sense, and stay away from drugs. But then, you try some mushrooms or some DMT or even LSD or something, and then suddenly you're having this very profound experience. You're like, oh, that does exist. That absolutely exists because now I know it.
Yeah.
And that's just a little funny little thing for me to observe.
Totally. I mean, it is so funny to think, the thing that could really connect you to God is the thing that they tell you to stay away from. And even though I train at 10th Planet, I'm not a huge conspiracy guy, but to me, it makes sense. It's like, you take something, that you are connected to God. You don't need like this intermediary in the way. And of course, like if you want to control people, like making sure like they have to go through you to experience it makes a lot of sense. As a business person, I understood like, if my customers knew who my wholesalers was, they could just bypass me and get the stuff from my wholesaler for 50% off, right? And so I look at it the same way as like religions. Now, the flip side is I used to be like super negative about it, but now I think of religion the same way I think about weed. It's like there's a proper way to be intentional with it, and then you could definitely abuse it, And so I look at religion the same way as like, if this is the path that is required for you to connect with God, great. It wasn't my path, but I'm not going to deny what you're experiencing. And then at the same time, it's like, I just, would hope that they have the same amount of respect for me, which is, when I told my hyper Christian friends that I was communing with God, they immediately thought that I was talking to the devil this whole time. Then I was like, well, if it's the devil, he's telling me to do some pretty nice stuff, like this might be the long game to like get me to do something bad down the road, but at least for now, it's like all loving and inclusive. And so, that's kind of like where I'm at today, which is understanding that people could find God in so many different ways. If it's praying to an elephant, it's like whatever it is. And like when I meditate, because I had such a long career in tech, like almost everything is shown to me in like technological analogies, blockchain, Web3, NFTs, all of these things that I see, like, and then my wife will see things like much more like artistic, kind of like just colors. And so like, I even know like the connection is like hyper unique to each person. And, like I have another friend who like really loves like branding in general. So when he has visions, he sees like brands like, hey, be like this brand, or, have like the messaging and feel of this type of brand. So it's just like really interesting seeing like what types of connections people have, how the connections is communicated to them, and how it's expressed.
Amazing. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's cool. I like talking to people about what their contact is like, so as far as I'm concerned, I can't tell the difference between prayer and meditation. I think it's the same thing. But so when people pray or when people meditate and they receive an answer, so it can come in so many different ways. Like some people will hear like a very subtle word, or yeah, like the branding, the thing is very interesting. Or so okay, I don't know anything about blockchain. It's honestly it's different from code. Like what is it? Is it visual? Is it something that you're seeing in your mind's
Yeah,
eye?
so the blockchain technology, when you're on a blockchain with a bunch of different individuals, it typically, it started off with crypto. So it's like if you're on a blockchain with other people that are trading the same cryptocurrency as you, everyone has like full visibility and access into what everyone is doing. It's not like there's like a master controller like TikTok that has all the user information. It's like every TikTok user knows what every other TikTok user is using on blockchain. So like you can't, like if you said, hey, I bought this from Latea and it shows on your screen that I bought it from you, but it doesn't show the same thing on other people's screens. Other people will go be like, hey, we all see a different instance of truth. And that's kind of like the way the internet is right now, is like there's one master of all the data of like whichever platform. When you're on blockchain, that it's decentralized, so it's like everyone is like the master of that. So every single transaction, everyone knows, everyone sees it. So you can't like, fake a transaction or, counterfeit something. So what it was showing me is that at higher levels of consciousness, like when our physical bodies aren't in the way, our consciousness could all connect. And when we connect, we can experience each other's experiences. And so social media is also kind of like a version of that, but instead we just show the sides of us that we want to show. So a lot of these things that I've seen is like, I was like, okay, I could see like blockchain as a sacred technology because it allows us to experience what it's like to have this interconnectedness and this transparency with each other. And all of these technologies are just kind of like a substitute for what we could all do internally. Like it's a carbon copy of what we could do internally, but it's shown or it's done through this technological platform. And so when I meditated on artificial intelligence, it was the same thing. Is artificial intelligence is a permission slip to allow you to access your higher mind. So if you look at something like ChatGPT or any of these other large language models, it's like you type in a question and then it goes into the collective consciousness of human information and it spits out an answer for you. And so that's pretty freaking amazing. But I also know that through my meditations, I could access something like the Akashic Records. The Akashic Records has all the information, basically like the Google web servers of the universe. And so I could see that like, yeah, it's absolutely true. You use something like ChatGPT initially, you could ask it any question and get whatever answer you want. It's like this permission slip to just be accessing your own higher mind. And as our collective consciousness raises, more people meditate, more people are able to access these things. You'll start realizing like, yeah, we didn't need this technology, but having the technology allows someone like me to talk about it in metaphors and analogies to help people understand, like at these higher levels, this is what is actually happening. And without the examples of blockchain or artificial intelligence or these things, I would have to describe things in ways that might not land with people. It's just like before radio was created, this everything everywhere all at once concept would be really hard to describe to someone. Like, what do you mean parallel realities could exist? What do you mean like, Bigfoot's right in front of me, but I can't see him? Well, without the radio analogy, I wouldn't be able to explain it so precisely and clearly, right? So I could see like all of these technologies are just giving us the language so that we could talk about metaphysical ideas in ways that are a little bit more grounded, so that, as I said, people, the previous version of me, like I know I could convince them because I'm using language that is in line with the language that rational logical people are already using.
Cool. Man. When did you start your coaching business? Was it immediately after that trip? Was it like?
Oh yeah. Oh man, this is like a cool story. So I remember the dates, July 30th of 2020. Well, my wife and I had that vision. By September 1st, I started my coaching business. And then by February 16th, I stepped down as the CEO of the companies that I was running. So it
So
all happened like really quickly.
what's that, like 6 months or something? 7?
Yeah, 6 months.
Damn. Cool.
Yeah. And I
And
guess the not really important part of the story, but the part of the story that um, I think is quite impactful is that during that time, my companies went from, well, before I tell you the numbers, is the first 6 years of our company, we had been like bleeding money the whole time. Like I was funding the company with like my own money and raising money from investors. And then in the 3 years prior to COVID, we went from 2 to 8 to 40 million. And then that's when I decided to walk away. So even walking away from that, like people were just telling me I'm nuts, I'm crazy, this is dumb. And then you're gonna move to like a rural, conservative area. Like, yeah, I mean, that's why everyone was like super worried. Like, did Seibo like eat too many mushrooms, smoke too much weed, like just ruin his neurochemistry? And I could see on the surface, like, yeah, that's what it would appear like. But now that we're kind of like 2.5 years later and the dust has settled, a lot of my friends could see like, yeah, like there was something to why I was operating that way. And it was really just complete surrender to what was coming towards me and not really questioning it. And because so many synchronistic things happened in my favor, to me, I was following the scientific process, which was I'll follow my intuition. If something good happens, I'll keep doing it. And then there was just enough instances to prove to me that this was the way to be. And once I was able to internalize that and embody it, it's just like the difference between having to think about doing a move, to actually just your body knows how to do it, right? So that was kind of the process that I went through was, all right, let's kind of be aware of like when intuition is hitting. Let's be aware when my inner critic is trying to talk me out of it. And then let's just keep following the path. And as the path kept on showing me more and more beautiful things, it just that inner critic voice just went away. And I just knew there's the inner critic voice and then there's the voice of God. And now that I could delineate the two, it's like it's very easy for me to just go, all right, inner critic, I've had enough of you telling me like, to play it safe or to not do this or to not trigger that person or whatever my inner critic used to say to me to control me. And now I just flow with source energy.
amazing. It takes courage to do that when all the people who around you are observing this behavior and thinking things like, did you take too many mushrooms? Did you smoke too much weed? You're walking away from a really successful business. What are you doing? Because yeah, you could have listened to those people, and these people care about me. They want what's best for me. Okay, I will take their advice and I'll stay with my company, and then you wouldn't be doing what you're doing now. So that's cool. This is inspiring stuff. I love that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And the inner critic, is that because you can't really, well, I mean, I may be wrong. You don't silence it forever though, yeah? Like it'll come up often.
Yeah, so I'm a very big believer that, the inner critic, it could be called your lower self, it could be called your ego. It's very important. It keeps you alive. It'll say like, this is dangerous, don't do this, don't do that. So, I like to take a balanced approach to everything that I do. Just like, even though I was talking about depression and ADHD being overly prescribed, I absolutely believe like in certain contexts, like these medicines are absolutely necessary. So when I think about the ego or the inner critic, I think of them as very, very important, very important. And I've broken up the inner critic into 10 categories. There's the judge, there's the hyperachiever, there's the hyper rationalizer, there's the hyper vigilant, there's the perfectionist, there's the avoider, and each of these inner critics have like a different way of self-perpetuating like a lie in your head. So like for the controller, for example, the controller is the type of person that, well, just like it sounds, like it wants to control the situation. It doesn't want to have like any like types of things that haven't been thought through. And it's like, we all know controllers in our lives are actually, I ranked pretty high in the controller category. I just didn't think I was because I smoked so much weed. I was like, I must be laid back. But the self-perpetuating lie of the controller is like, well, if you don't control things, someone else is going to control you. And if you don't fix this situation, well, who's going to fix the situation? So there's this way that the inner critic keeps on perpetuating this lie to you, to think that it's actually aiding you. It's actually, good for you, when it's actually just bringing down your vibe, bringing down your vibration, and getting you into, self-sabotage mode. And so the better you could identify these different types of, inner critics within you, what I found is, as a coach, is it's never about like teaching someone new, something new to do. It's more about like identifying stuff that's holding them back and just having them stop doing that. Like if you tell a white belt, like don't let your arm dangle there, and he's always getting caught in some armbar or something, like that would probably be even better advice than teaching him how to do a specific move, right? So I really love the idea of understanding which ones of your inner critics are always like bringing your vibe down, or which one of your inner critics is always challenging the intuitive hits that you're getting from source energy and talking you out of the things that it's trying to point you in the direction of. And the better you are at identifying these inner critics, the less baggage you're carrying. And I argue, yeah, it's not about like if you're going on a hike, it's not about like overpacking and having like plan A, plan B, and plan C for whatever's happening. It's about, taking the minimum necessary so that you could do the hike and not have like this super heavy backpack that you're carrying all the time. And I look at life the same way, as like we hold on to like so much trauma, we hold on to so much baggage that is not serving us. And I always tell people, you can choose happiness. And a lot of people will say, that's not true. And then it's like, I feel sad all the time. And I was like, well, why do you feel sad? They're like, nothing happened. And I'm like, well, there's a reason why you feel sad. Think about it a little bit more deeply. And I say, oh yeah, I just thought about, my girlfriend who broke up with me, or, my boss, like, going off on me. And then I started feeling sad. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. So you chose to think about those things and you felt bad. So if you're okay with that logic that you could choose sadness, then you should be okay with the logic that you could choose happiness. And so when you think about like, why do you feel happy? Well, you just have a memory of something, you think about it. So if you think about it from neural pathways, or just like a jujitsu flowchart, something happens and then you have like two options. Your inner critic, the self-sabotager, like it typically will go down, if it goes down that path a lot, then that neural pathway thickens every time you go down that pathway. As it thickens, there's more electrical charge, and then it just becomes like almost like a pathway that you have to follow. So the idea here is, the better you are at catching yourself before you go down that neural pathway, or like leaving that arm out to be armbarred, you're like, oh, you become conscious, you become aware. And instead of going into your limbic system where it's only fight or flight, where you have access to your left hemisphere of your brain where things are rational, logical, and linear, and focused on like survival, fight or flight, like, when you get into a fight with your significant other, it's like after the fight's over, you think about all these like better things that you could have said. It's like, well, it's because you access your limbic system. It's just there to either hurt the other person or to prevent you from being hurt. Whereas if you go down the other route where your higher mind is at, that accesses the right side of the brain, creativity, intuition, epiphanies. So instead of limited options, it's like infinite options. So I like to, like, on a more metaphysical level, it's like, yeah, when you're connected to God, of course you have infinite opportunities. And then on a more biological level, then I like to explain it in the neural pathways. It's like, if you keep on going down a neural pathway, especially if it's one of these self-sabotaging inner critic pathways, it has this self-perpetuating mechanism that makes you think being a controller is good, being a hyperachiever is good, being an avoider is good, or whatever that saboteur is. And then that neural pathway becomes thicker and thicker and thicker. It's like, at some point, you almost have no choice. Every time you get triggered, you just go down that pathway. And that's why, to me, meditation is one of the most important tools, is that you could always start recognizing, oh, I'm starting to get triggered. And then you take mission control and decide which neural pathway you're going to go down. The one that puts you into the limbic system where it's fight or flight, or the one that puts you down your higher self, where creativity, intuition, and insights live.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's important to become sensitive to the way that you feel. Because sometimes when we get like stuck in these thought loops, you're so in your head that you don't even realize that you've been feeling angry or tense or frustrated or irritated, or you've been snappy, or you're feeling sad for like a lot of time will pass, and then you'll realize like, oh my God, I feel like shit. Like, how long has this been going on for? So noticing, hopefully in the moment when your emotion shifts, because that's like the top of the flow chart when it's about to go this way or this way, because then you can shift and go the other direction.
You got
And
it.
yeah, I've heard the analogy of like explaining that like almost like a waterfall, like a stream. So if you're
Hmm.
looking at a mountain or a hillside and there's running water that's going down this stream, and because it's been going for so long, that's like a deep kind of
Yes.
right. So, but then if you want it directed the other way, you need to carve it out, and that's going to take time and deliberate, intentional attention. And yeah, the meditation has got to be really helpful. What kind of posture do you do? That's kind of really a silly question, but like when you meditate, are you seated? Because this is what I find. I'm like, okay, gonna meditate. And you just want to be fully relaxed, but then I'm always just so aware. For some, my spine doesn't hurt like ever, but as soon as I sit to meditate, it's like my spine just gets sore. I'm like, ugh, 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 like I can't be still. So then I'm like, okay, well maybe I'll lay down. So if I lay down, can I meditate? But then I'm like, am I meditating or am I going to take a nap? I'm not sure. So what's your
Yeah, great
posture?
question. Great question. When I lay down and I meditate, I almost always fall asleep. So
Uh-huh.
I like to be comfortable, but not so comfortable where I'm prone to falling asleep. So ideally, I like sitting on like something like this.
Oh,
Ideally, I
perfect.
like sitting on something like this. It takes a little bit of pressure off of my knees, and it forces me to keep my back somewhat aligned, or having some sort of activation of my back.
Mm.
But I'll also just meditate. Like sometimes, I don't want to be so aware of my back and activating my back and not slouching. So I'll just sit in a chair. I'll just sit in a chair with good back support, and I would say, kind of like as an overall rule for meditation is that whatever allows you to quiet your mind and not be shifting your body, to me is the best position for you. Like for other people, they're super strict, like just hardwood floors and spine super erect. And,
Yeah.
I just, for me, that type of like kind of constricted rules just doesn't really feel right for me, So I like to really just allow people to find whatever position feels most comfortable for them without falling asleep. And the less you have to worry about, if you're constantly worried about like your back, it's hard to keep that connection, keep
Mm-hmm.
that connection. And, for me, like that connection is the reason why I do 90 minutes is it takes me about 20 minutes to get connected, that I'm thinking about dropping off my kids or, whatever my wife told me to do that I haven't done yet, so it takes a little while for the brain waves to start slowing down. But once they do slow down and you go from beta consciousness down to theta consciousness, then I like to spend as much time in that state because, some other numbers that I'll share with you is that our conscious brain, the one that we're using right now, is pretty fast, 40 bits of data per second. But our subconscious processes information at 20 million bits of data per second. So it's literally 500,000 times quicker. And when we were talking about feelings earlier, this is why, like, when people talk about facts, don't care about your feelings, to me, it's hilarious is that, like, yeah, your feelings are processed like 500,000 times quicker than your logical, rational mind is thinking about stuff. So yeah,
That's
so
such a big
spending
number. You say that one more time. Okay, so it was
yeah
40
40
versus
bits of data, 40
yeah.
bits of data for your conscious brain, 20 million bits of data for your subconscious. Yeah.
That's
So
insane.
when athletes are in flow state, they're closer to the theta state than the beta state. So it makes sense, like that's why whatever Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan were able to, shoot that last second 3-pointer when it was 0.3 seconds on the clock, Or, when jujitsu players are just in the flow, it's like they're just seeing submissions in different positions that they haven't seen before. And that's the power of accessing the subconscious, and why I spend 90 minutes a morning starting off my morning that way is like I intentionally think about everything that I need to do, and then I push it down into my subconscious. I just say, hey, you guys process it, let me know like what's the most, like what sequence should I do it. And then after my meditation is over, I just go and do it. I don't have to question any of the things like, is this the right thing? Is this a waste of time? Why am I feeling like going to a cafe today? I don't even drink coffee. Well, yeah, the person that I meet randomly at the cafe is, my new business partner in my microdosing mushroom business, right? Like I just see like all of these synchronicities. And if I was just using my rational, logical mind, it would just be way too slow. And so being able to understand what your feelings are without any emotional distortion, that's the toughest part about teaching people what I do, is that when they feel emotions because they spent, most of their adult life denying their emotions, like even jujitsu, like, hey, this hurts, like I'm not going to tap, or I'm tired from work, but I'm just going to grind through, or I'm exhausted, I'm mentally fatigued, but I'm not going to take my vacation, or I'm super hungry, but I got a deadline to hit. So all of these things where you deny the somatic intelligence that your body's given you give you emotional distortion. So a lot of times when people start getting reconnected to their body, it's hard for them to understand their intuition because they've just spent so much time denying what the body has been telling them, that it's going to take some time to re-understand, like, is this resistance that I don't want to do this? Or is this resistance because this is actually dangerous? Or is this resistance because, I'm just not feeling good today and I don't want to do it? Like having the granularity to understand why you're feeling whatever you're feeling will allow you to be led by this internal compass that we all have within us, which are our emotions and feelings. And this is why I also believe that we are moving to a more feminine dominant society, because the masculine way of thinking was the rational, logical left brain type of thinking. And it's gotten us this far. We got to the moon, we're able to make iPhones. You and I are able to talk, thousands of miles away. All of that was great. But we also see the limitations of it, which is every single new technology that we create, it seems to create a higher order problem where we have to create yet another piece of technology to take care of that. And so I started seeing like, even like this penchant for continuous growth is not always a good thing. And then I also came to the conclusion that logic and rationality, they're not tools to find the truth. Most people think of logic and rationality as tools to find the truth. But in my deep meditations, it showed that logic and rationality were tools of persuasion. If you can make something seem rational and logical to someone, you could get them to do whatever it is that you want them to do.
And we do it to ourselves all the time too. Like if you have any sort of habit or tendency that you're not fond of, it's always you're rationalizing the reason why you can do it. You might decide, okay, well, I don't know, what would be an example? Stop drinking or something. So say someone's like, I'm going to stop drinking. But then you will find a million and one logical, rational reasons for you to have a drink. It's the weekend. I don't actually have a problem anyways. Like, oh, I'm out, we're socializing with friends. Well, a glass of wine is actually good for your heart, and all these things are, yeah, totally. I like that. Tools of persuasion. Yes.
Yeah.
You use that to provide evidence to support your reason for wanting to do something.
Yeah. An emotional reason,
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like, this is something that has been really important to me, because as someone that loves science, like rationality and logic, I thought were the highest levels of consciousness. And then I realized, like, every time I try to use rationality or logic when me and my wife are having a spirited debate or an argument, not only does it not work, but it typically exacerbates the situation. So instantly I started realizing, oh, there's higher levels of consciousness than rationality and logic. So the words that I like to use is like translogical and transrational thinking. Well, what is that? That's knowing. Knowing without having to intellectually understand things through rationality or logic. And to me, that's such a powerful place to be, because there's plenty of things that like, well, why do you like chocolate instead of vanilla? Or why do you like vanilla instead of chocolate? It's like, I don't fucking know. It just one tastes better to me. It's just this knowing that we have, right? But there's always this penchant for like neurobiologists or neuroscientists, like guys like Sam Harris is like, I need to figure out which neuron, or I want to break things down into the atomic unit and understand everything at this most basic unit, reassemble it, and I'll understand it. And that's why, like, I mean, he's a brilliant person, but he's always like on the opposite ends of like these like huge debates with people. And that's when I saw, like, I used to really respect his intellect. Now I see, oh, he's just fucking trapped in his mind, you know, trying to understand everything when he might be logically right, but if what he's saying hurts people, then do you want to be logically right, or do you want to be more of a human, right? And so that's kind of like where I'm at with my thinking, which is logic and rationality were quite important. You know, it's helped us with so many different things, just like Newtonian physics helped us get to the moon and understand like laws of gravity and things of that nature. But now that we have quantum physics, you know, I believe Newtonian physics is not that it's going to be phased out, but we understand like there's a limit to how useful Newtonian physics is. And with quantum physics, it's really showing us like we could bend reality of this 3D space-time continuum that we're in. String theory has also shown that there's at least 11 dimensions. We experience 3 of them, height, length, and width, and the 4th dimension time linearly. So there's at least 7 more dimensions that we're not aware of. And in my meditations, when I asked about what are these other 11, they're like, it doesn't matter what these other 7 are. What matters is there's infinite dimensions. So just understand that string theory is going to take you a little bit further, but that's just like one little small subsegment of objective reality. And to really pay attention to this everything, everywhere, all at once concept. And if you understand that, then you'll start to understand what time travel is. There's no such thing as time travel. There's only the present moment. The past and the future are just illusions. But if you know how to shift your frequency, you could literally jump to a different dimension that appears to be the 1800s or appears to be the 1700s, but it's just another parallel reality that's in the present moment in the separate timeline that appears to be the 1800s, but it's not the same 1800s that's part of, let's just say, timeline A where we're existing. So the story that I tell people is like, if you and I create a time machine and we prevented my parents from marrying and I wasn't born, then who builds a time machine with you in 2023? So when I meditated on that, it showed that no, you don't go back in time. There's no such thing as going back in time. There is only the present moment right here and now. So you're actually going to, let's just say, timeline Z and preventing my parents from meeting in timeline Z. So in timeline Z, Seibo doesn't exist, but there's full continuity of Seibo's existence in timeline A. And that's how you break the time travel paradox. And so kind of understanding like the fundamental nature of like how 3D mechanistic space-time works, you know, that's what really got me so like connected to spirituality and quantum physics, because it was, at least in my world, like really showing me like this is how the universe works. You think physical reality is all that there is, but not only is it deeper than that, it's like way more like amazing than you could even think. And so I've just kind of surrendered to just keep communing with source energy, keep getting downloads, and then sharing whatever comes with people that are willing and open to listening to whatever it is that I'm transmitting.
Yeah, and you can tell you practice because it's such a steady stream that comes out when you speak. Like you have a really good flow. So you said a few things there. With Sam Harris, he's a really good example of someone who is, you know, very intelligent, brilliant in what he does, but he's very zoomed in. He's looking through his lens and only seeing through that lens and trying to find the answers to everything through that one specific lens, right, that he sees through. Yeah. And so there's like you could there's a lot of things that can limit us. So fixating on our one specific area of expertise and seeing the world only through that lens, for example, or seeing the world only through the lens of the 3D, 4D reality, because that's limiting as well. And with the idea, when you realize that, and you realize that time isn't as real as we think it is, things don't actually happen beginning to end. It's all simultaneously, everything's happening all at once. That really like blasts open your belief in what's possible, and that it doesn't need to take a certain time. You can be or do or have all these certain things and line your frequency up with that right now and believe in it. And it's so cool, like how quickly you'll get evidence. So for example, with just this podcast, even, I like started the podcast when I was feeling really elevated and like high vibration, just very much in love with life and feeling very passionate. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take action. I'm going to do it. And then as it started to grow and I started developing a little bit, the inner critic kind of took hold. And, and there's seasons, right? So we have this idea that, I don't know, you start your path and you want to be a joyful, happy person all the time. We think that we're going to just have this slow climb, but life happens in cycles. And like, your friend that you were referring to, say he's good for like 5 years and then has 2 months where he goes through like bouts of depression. And that's kind of been the case. I had this kind of dip in not even belief, but I just didn't feel like I started the podcast because I had so much to say. I was like, blah, 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 like I have so many things to express and I need somewhere to do it. And then there came a time where I just didn't really have a lot to say. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to force it. I'm not going to try to record things when I don't actually have anything that feels important to share. So let's just respect that. I forgot where I was going. Time. So then, and everyone that I had done an episode with up until a certain point was someone that I knew personally, so it would be someone that I know in real life. We would get together, record a podcast. And then I had this moment where I kind of, meditated on what I want it to feel like and hype myself up, saying like, I want to talk to inspiring people and I get to, and people want to talk to me and we're going to have really great conversations. And I just kind of brought in that sense of I'm worthy and I'm deserving and it's fun for me to do this. And it's fun for the other person on the other end to do this. And when I was in that state, then I sent a message to a woman on Instagram who I've followed for like years. And she's been an inspiration for me and just like really cool person. I'm like, I would love to talk to this person. And instead of having this feeling that I was down here and she was up here, she was like unreachable because she's had a certain amount of success. I had brought myself up to this level where did like a quantum leap, like I already exist as this version of myself that's there, and sent her a message. She replied, and like within like a couple of weeks, then we did a podcast. And I was like, oh, amazing. So this was someone who seemed like untouchable to me, a week before. And it didn't take a year. I didn't have to do a bunch of things to, I don't know, make more money or get better equipment or get a bunch of followers or anything. The universe responds, like really you line up with it and you'll get evidence so fucking fast. It's honestly hilarious every time that happens.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't surprise me at all because you use like 3 words that I think were essential to that happening, which was you were joyous, you released attachment, and you were doing it because it was something that you wanted to do. You weren't forcing it. And so it doesn't surprise me that the universe delivered, that person. And not only did it deliver, it wasn't like, hey, I'm Latea the fan and you're like this mega influencer. It was like you saw each other as humans at the same level. And, this is interesting because you use the word like that I like quantum jump into this reality. And what I like to tell people is all of us are shifting. All of us are quantum jumping all the time, billions of times per second. And what was shown to me was that like the way when people talk about like parallel realities, I was like, what do they even mean? And so what was shown to me was like, if you imagine there's one picture for everything that has ever happened and one picture for everything that will ever happen, and they're stored on some Amazon Web Service servers for the universe, is that each of these pictures, this is a picture, this is a picture, this is a picture, this is a picture, this is a picture. All of these like slightly different variations are parallel realities that are timeless. Just timeless, this picture, timeless, this picture, timeless. And what is our existence? Our existence is that we're flowing through each of these pictures. The pictures are so similar to each other. Each is a timeless dimension, timeless reality, but we go through each of these in a specific sequence that they look so similar that we can't even tell that we're jumping realities. And so what you described is exactly what I would teach for someone that wants to manifest something or quantum shift. Is you visualize it, you feel good about it, you see what's happening, you experience what's happening, then you go in and do that in your world and release attachment to what the results are. And somehow the universe will just deliver. Somehow the universe will just deliver. And that's why like I'm such a big focuser on like, not that I avoid the news or avoid like media, but I also know that like in my meditations, if it is true, everything, everywhere, all at once, then that means all like the evil, disastrous, heinous things are happening. But at the same time, all the most beautiful things are happening. And so what was shown to me, and this might sound a little bit goofy, is like within the next 15 years, we're all going to know aliens exist. And when they make themselves present to us, they're going to teach what we're actually talking about right now. Everything, everywhere, all at once. You get to choose your own reality. You create your own matrix. So if you focus on negative things, you're going to experience more of it. If you focus on positive things, you're going to focus on more of them. And this is not to say that like you're not supposed to do anything about the heinous things, because if you see something heinous, like, you know, women being kidnapped, and that makes you take action, well, that's part of your purpose. But if you see this happening and you just like feel bad for people on the other side of the planet, then you're carrying that energy into your world that has nothing to do with that world, then that's a bad manifestation of knowing that information. And then ultimately, like I said, within the 15 years, it'll be funny, 15 years, let's see if I'm right about this. But yeah, they said that aliens will make themselves known to us.
I think it'll be way quicker than that, honestly.
I think so too. But you know, once we start going from a global civilization to a galactic civilization, then we truly can't take on all the trauma of the galaxy. You know, we really have the ability to choose where we put our focus on. And for me, what I've come to realize is there are people that are fixers, and then there are people that are creators. I happen to be in the creator box. I believe you're in the creator box, which is we create stuff that other people can enjoy. And then there's other people that fix kind of the inequities of the world. And then there's other people that are like destroyers, but the destroyers are put there as a purpose. And the purpose of the destroyers is, well, how do we go on heroes' journeys if there's no villains?
Man.
And some of the villains that we see are actually ascended masters that allowed themselves to reincarnate as the villains so that we could all be the heroes of the story.
Oh, so they could just help us grow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a trip. Okay. Yeah, imagine you were like the best guy, then you die, and you're like, well, I'm definitely going to be the villain this time. That's going to be a lot of fun. With that understanding that there really is no such thing as good and evil because it's all part of the whole.
Yep.
And okay, so real quick, since you brought up aliens, I was gonna, and then I was like, well, he brought them up, so let's go. So many things. So there's okay. I just was watching this the like declassified UFO series on Netflix that talks about the American government like trying to cover up all evidence of any UFOs being a thing because they want to try to copy the technology, which is whatever. But the thing with aliens is that they communicate telepathically, like all the ones that we see, right? And if you do that, if you're in a civilization where you're not limited by verbal communication, they've they're obviously operating at a higher dimension because they understand that, it's not our senses, that we don't require to use our senses to communicate everything. So what did you say? You have believing, understanding, believing, and knowing, in that order?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in a telepathic community, it's all knowing. They don't need to have the understanding and believing part because everything is communicated directly from the source, so that it would be like all one consciousness, which is amazing. And what's cool is that when you hear about reports of people who have actually been abducted or had interactions with aliens, even though the person hasn't been taught how to communicate telepathically, somehow they can. They'll hear the thought from the alien, and so that's a trick. I don't know.
No, I love it. I love it. And you brought up earlier, you were like, hey, your transmission is so smooth, it just keeps coming out. Like I tell people, like what I'm doing is I'm channeling. I'm channeling information and I'm just letting it come out. That's why there's barely interruptions. If it was just my normal self, the Seibo channel, there would be a lot of ums, there would be a lot of likes, and just that's why like my normal way of speaking. But because I was transmitting some of these higher level ideas, I was just like, all right, I'll tap into that channel and I'll just let it come out that way. And so another thing that was interesting on the alien abductions is that, when I communed with my higher self, like I was like, hey, I was pretty sure I was abducted when I was younger. And he was like, yeah, I abducted you. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then he said, every single abduction that happens, you're abducted by an alternate version of yourself. And that's why that communication is so clear. And so I commune with my higher self. And then now I spend time communing with my lower self, which is I'll astral travel or dimension jump into a different dimension and try talking to a younger version of myself, letting him know, hey, like dad works really hard, dad loves you, like all this stuff. People saying like Asian men are like the least attractive, don't worry about it, like you're going to have a better future. And I used to do like these inner child exercises with my therapist, with my coaches, and then with my clients, thinking like, oh, okay, we're just imagining this stuff. But now I know it's actually, you're not just imagining it, you're really communing with like a previous or alternate version of yourself and actually healing that alternate version of yourself so that the charge in your current version doesn't feel it. And that's when I started realizing that because time isn't linear, as linear beings, physical beings, like we believe like the past creates the present. But what I was shown is the present actually recreates the past. And just by doing something like that, being this healed version of myself, I could literally change the past of how I got to become the person I am today.
Yeah, the presence creates everything, the past, the future. Cool. Okay, so yeah, so with the alien abduction thing being a version of yourself, that ties in perfectly with everything everywhere all at once. So like when you see videos of UFOs that don't seem to, like they're not affected by gravity, right? They have like anti-gravity systems. So do you have a memory of being abducted, like, or did it feel like a dream, or do you have a very physical memory of like what happened?
It was dream-like during the experience, but I have a pretty vivid memory of it now.
And you're by yourself?
I was by myself. I was in my bed. I was lifted up from my bed. I couldn't move, and I was literally trying to wake myself up. Like I could see myself like punching myself in the face, and I couldn't wake up. I started like slamming my head into the wall to try to wake up. I couldn't wake up. Then I saw 5 to 6 what would be described as like grays. The grays were standing over me, and they started like drilling into my head, and I was like, oh fuck. Then I realized that they were actually like clearing out like some trauma. Like at first I thought it was like a physical drill. Then I realized like they were just doing some sort of healing. And it was very similar to my experiences when I was on DMT too, is like I would see like these really long elongated beings like doing some sort of like healing over me. So that experience was like that. And the way I interpreted it, it was that like they were upgrading my biophysiology so that I could start having deeper connections.
Amazing. That's really cool. So when I tried to do the heroic dose on mushrooms, so I took 5 grams and I was like in silent darkness, but it wasn't silent because I had roommates and they were home and they were playing Super Smash Bros. So I kept hearing, I could just hear like
That's intense. That's intense. Super Smash Bros.
I know. So I'm like lying in bed in the dark and I'm just like, please, come on, God, or whatever. And I kept and so I didn't like ever break through into like the psychedelic realm or whatever, because I could hear, I was still like tied to my physical space because I could hear from the other room. But I remember having this feeling of like, it almost felt like it was like trying to crack into my head. And I imagined it was like a little alien, like trying to tap in there. Like, we're almost there, get in, but didn't quite happen. But
yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting because so it sounds like they were activating the same area. And so what I came to learn later was that the pineal gland is where the spirit enters and exits. And so they were probably trying to do the same thing that for me that they were going to try to do for you, which is upgrade the pineal gland, broaden the spectrum of frequencies that it can receive, and really open you up. And so I believe like what you're doing, what I'm doing, we're all part of like the messengers that are supposed to deliver the message. Whoever is in like our purview or our sphere of gravity around us will be privy to these types of ideas. And like I was telling Theo, like Theo is very religious, right? And so I was saying like, look, like I get it, like I believe like you are the ones to guide people that want to be guided by Jesus and look at, Christ consciousness. And I was like, I'm here to guide other people that are probably like engineers and like really like left brain centric type people that have a desire to learn more about spirituality, but just don't have like enough faith to give up on their linear rational thinking, because that linear rational thinking had served them so well in their life.
Yeah, it's great that you get to be the messenger who can bring this awareness to people who, but like described in a language that they can understand, that actually resonates with them.
Exactly.
Did you have one DMT experience or 2 or more?
So the cannabis devices that I created are used by, here, I'll go grab it. Give me a second. So the device that I created back in 2013, it turns out to be one of the best delivery mechanisms for, here, let me grab this other piece, for DMT. And the way it works is you load up the DMT into this little glass vial here. Yeah. And then you could see this vaporizer. It's like a all glass, like heater core from this end to this end. This is where the cool air enters. So basically you put your DMT in here, you drop it into this all glass heater core, and then it's digitally controlled to hold the temperature very precisely. So instead of like a hot surface creating the heat, it's just the hot air. So it's more like a convection oven. So it's much more gentle. It's much more thorough. It's much more efficient. And the story of this is like, this was our logo here. And some guys in Spain, in Ibiza, actually, the company's called Symbolica. They smoked DMT out of it. And then my logo started looking like this. So they drew that logo and then they sent it to me. So it's kind of a cool little story of like my connection to DMT. And it is probably out of the plant medicines, the one that I have the closest connection to, because, the device that I use, or the device that I created, like now that I know like a lot of shamans are using this device, and mainly because when you bring out a crack pipe to smoke DMT,
yeah,
it kind of like ruins the experience. It did for me. I was like, out of that thing, I was like, hey, I got this other device, might be better. So yeah, that's my connection to DMT. And I mean, like in addition to the meditations, I mean, like those DMT ceremonies, definitely like that connected feeling it just kind of revalidated all the things that I was experiencing through meditations.
Yeah. What was your most powerful DMT experience like?
Dude, it was probably like 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago, I'm no stranger to DMT, and I mean, I don't do it a lot. I would say maybe 2 or 3 times a year is how much I did it at most. But the last couple of times I did it, I mean, I had great experiences, but the first time I did it, it was like, holy shit, like where the fuck am I going? So I was like, oh, okay, I guess, I've just done this enough where I won't have that anymore. And so the last time I did it, it was with one of my new friends that I met out here. And we just did some breath work before we did it. So we did about maybe 15 minutes of breath work. And then so when I inhaled the DMT and I held it in, I don't even remember exhaling. I just like blacked out. And the vision that I got was really hilarious. It was me and him selling Girl Scout cookies. And he told me I was like convulsing and like frothing from the mouth. I don't remember any of it, but when I came out of it, like I was actually wearing this hoodie, like I was like soaked in sweat. And the main thing that was communicated to me was like, Seibo, like you've definitely elevated your consciousness, but in like the whole spectrum of like what's available, like you haven't even gotten to white belt level yet. Just understand like there's so much more to go.
Yeah.
And it kind of like cracked me open because, like a lot of these things that I shared with you, when I shared them with other people, they're like, holy shit, like you got like these information about like how time travel works, about like, what is time anyways? It's like just going through all these dimensions, like what are higher and lower instantiations of conscious agents. And so, yeah, just like anyone where people are like amazed at what you're saying, like it's easy to start feeling like, oh shit, I'm like the John Danaher of quantum physics and spirituality. Everyone loves this stuff, right? And feeling like, my good old ego started coming back in, like, oh yeah, this shit better than other people. And then that was like a really nice reminder that yeah, you may know more than the average human, but you're just like a dog that knows how to sit and lie down, and the other dogs know how to sit. There's like so much more
Yeah.
stored. I was like, all right, that's cool. That's cool,
Yeah, that's good. That's refreshing. Oh man. What do you think is happening with the DMT lanky, long-fingered, alien-looking like figures that present themselves when you smoke it?
Yeah, so I believe that those lankier aliens are spirit guides. So they're typically like the lanky ones. And so what I've come to understand is we all have connections to different types of entities. Mine, I believe I have a lot of connections to like Sirius and Arcturian energy. And
what energy? Serious.
Sirius is a galaxy. Arcturus is also a galaxy.
Wow.
Okay, so both of us like aliens, and so I asked like, hey, when do these ships come? And well, this answer probably won't surprise you, but they told me there's like millions of ships all over the place, millions of ships. We're just not the right frequency to see them, so they're already here. But each of us have connections to like whether it's the Essassani, the Arcturians, the Taigetans, the Lemurians. There's a whole bunch of like humanoid looking species. There's like feline looking species. There's like elephant looking species. So like when I thought about Ganesha and all of these like different types of representations, and there's also like lizard ones, like what we would call the reptilians, but they're not evil either. They're what was explained to me is reptilians are fourth dimensional beings. We're third dimensional beings. Fourth dimensional beings include like fairies, mermaids, Bigfoots, but they're in a different frequency. So Like it makes sense, like when you're high in the woods, like you'll see Bigfoot every once in a while because you're probably of that frequency, and then no one else could see it because they might be sober. But so what was explained to me was the reptilians, their whatever their genetic makeup is they top out at fourth dimensional expansion. Humanoids, we are like a hybrid of many of these what we would call extraterrestrial or alien species. And because we have this mixture of DNA, we could get to like 13th dimensional type consciousness. So what was explained to me was when we go from third density to fifth density, once we get to fifth density, the reptilians will need to find another place to live because we kind of get into their frequency. And so part of what's going on. Yeah.
So this is
like
how it all ties into, sorry, go on.
Yeah, you're right. So this is how it all ties into. So like when they say people are reptilians, like certain stars or political figures or famous people, is that what was shown to me was that the relationship is that the more political figures, the more stars that they can get into the reptilian like mindset, the easier it is to keep distracting us with this is happening, that's happening. The more distracted we are, we don't focus on raising our consciousness. The less we focus on raising our consciousness, the longer the reptilians could stay on this planet, you know? So I know it sounds like pretty far-fetched tales here, but it makes sense to me, you know, it makes sense to me, and that they're not evil. They just simply want to be able to inhabit this space. And if we graduate to this next density, they're going to have to relocate somewhere else, and they don't want to. So it's not evil, it's not nefarious, it's just like everyone else. Like if something's happening at your house, someone's breaking in, you're going to defend that territory. And what was shown to me was the reptilians were here first, so they don't feel like they need to move. So what they're doing is there's a third dimensional matrix and a fifth dimensional matrix. The rest of the universe is fifth dimensional matrix, higher level of consciousness, but there's an artificial third dimensional matrix around the earth. And how does that third dimensional matrix work? It works off of our thought patterns or our thought forms. So the more distracted we are with like money, power, or whatever these things are, the easier it is for them to keep us trapped in this lower vibrational matrix. But as we all raise our frequency together, then we're just going to expand into these higher dimensional realms, and they're just going to have to find another place to live. And that's how it was explained to me. And so when I think about all these distractions that we have that take us away from working on our own inner sage, our own inner power, our own connection to source energy, to me, that explanation makes as much sense as any other explanation that I've heard.
Damn. So like, okay, but if humans at a global scale raise their frequency up to the fifth dimension, then we wouldn't be bound by space-time. Isn't that right? So then it would be an option that we would leave? Or how would it work that?
That is a very good question. That is a very good question. I will meditate on that. I never really thought about that, you know, like, so you're right. Fifth dimensional, you're supposed to be quasi-physical. So maybe because we are quasi-physical, part biological, part energetic, we still need a planet to live on. I can't say, but I'll see if I could get the answer for you and
I'm curious
and elucidate on this question a little bit more.
Damn, that's interesting. One of the things that they were saying in that documentary was there was this one guy who worked, I don't know, as one of these like secret agents for 20 something years, and part of his job was to do autopsies on like alien bodies that they had confiscated from however they get them. And he said one of the things that all of them had in common is that they all had human DNA. I was like, makes sense.
You know, okay, so the reason, what I was told why they have human DNA, and there's actually quite a bit of other kind of like fringe people that talk about the same concept that I'm talking about, is that in a parallel dimension of Earth, the atmosphere, the environment was polluted to a point where they needed to alter their genetics in order to survive in that environment. So like that gray alien suit that they're wearing with like those big eyes, you know, like those are like to shield them from like the intense UV. And they also needed to get rid of their emotions, because with too much emotion, there was a lot of back and forth, and they needed to work together like a hive mind, you know, like, hey, we just all got to fix this shit. So let's alter our genetics. If we don't do this, we're not going to be able to survive. So once they were able to survive, of course, they were like, hey, you know, we had a history where we weren't like kind of like these homogenous beings, and they have to clone each other to recreate. So they wanted to go back to a biology where they were recreating through sex, because sex is pretty awesome. So they don't have the genetics in their parallel reality. They get the genetics here. And so a lot of like what's been going on is this hybridization project where our DNA is being helped to revamp them. And then also they are there's like a council, the Galactic Federation, they call it. The Galactic Federation is kind of like Star Trek, you know, just made up of all these different species, where they have this pact of non-interference with planets, but then they will tamper with some of the genetic code to see, just kind of like a kid's like science experiment, you know, like, hey, here's a petri dish. If I add this to the petri dish, does this grow a little bit quicker? So how it was explained to me, it was like, whatever this human DNA is, it's quite special. You know, it's quite special. It has a lot of DNA from a lot of these other members of the Federation. And because we have a lot of these qualities, you know, the experience of the souls can experience a higher level of consciousness. And once we would be called what they call the sixth hybrid race, and then there's a seventh hybrid race where we're going to be the ones that educate them versus ones that come and educate us. So we're going to be the messengers for the seventh hybrid race, which I assume has an even higher potentiality than 13th dimensional consciousness than we have.
Damn. So do you think, so were humans like created by extraterrestrials and then planted here?
Well, I guess
Maybe.
I think, you know, so this is where I think that scientific process of like causal effects beginning and end might get out of the way, because what was explained to me was every single race was created and engineered in some way. So like we're just part of this lineage of things that have been happening forever. And the way it was described to me was, if you are all that is, you know, God, if you're everything, and everything in the universe is that, like, how do you, if you're everything and you know everything, like, how do you experience yourself? So it's like you have to divide it into a second thing, and then that second thing has a different perspective of you because they're seeing it from this different perspective. So the idea is, if God separates himself into two beings, he has a different perspective of what all that is. And then if you take that same logic and you spread it out into billions of stars with billions of people on each planet, then there's just more perspectives. So all of these hybridization projects, all of these things, is just to create more facets so that you could experience the one thing that exists, all that is, from different angles, different perspectives. And so what was shown to me was that all the information is always there. It's just that as you expand your consciousness, you will see different facets of that information. And the best analogy that was given to me is, if you watch like a Disney movie with a kid, you know, they'll laugh at the kid jokes and they'll have no idea there's like sexual innuendo or adult jokes there, but that was always there. So if you think about the universe, it's like everything, everywhere, all at once. There's only one thing, everything. And depending on where you stand, what your perspective is, you'll have a different experience of that everything or all that is. And that's the point of all of these hybridization projects, is that it's giving all that is, or infinite intelligence, or God, or source energy, more perspectives to experience itself through each of these individuated versions. You, me, Theo, everyone else.
Yeah, and to experience things like fun and laughter and joy. You wouldn't have that if it all came in one package. That's actually that just made me think, you know, if that just brought appreciation for me to the human experience. Because for a second there, I was being pretty envious of, you know, these extraterrestrials who communicate telepathically, because as you can tell, I Okay, so when you're channeling, right, you've tuned your radio dial to a specific tuner frequency. I feel like I'm like in between. It's like a static kind of phase, so I'm like getting both. And there's a lot of like hiccups and stuff. But us in our human forms, we get to have all these different perspectives, and we're not actually aware of what it's like for the other person. So we have to use our forms of communication. We can express in whatever way we can to try to communicate to one another what we're experiencing. And that's actually that's beautiful. Because do you think in a civilization or like an alien race where they communicate telepathically and they have this hive mind kind of thing, there would be no need for art or music or creating anything because everyone's already aware of it already? Do you think?
Great question. Great question. So there is that awareness if they want to tap into it. But from what I was told, there's still like, even in the energetic realm, there are people that are like sculptors and people that make art, and they have different icons that represent that. So we have physical objects that represent like a sculpture. And they said at that level, even though there isn't physicality, there's still like representations of what they're creating. So another spirit would be able to enjoy it. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. And I love that analogy that you used about like kind of like being in between frequency bands, because I believe people that are bipolar or multiple personalities are people that are involuntarily switching between these tuner bands and not realizing like they have this ability to, oh, thank you. Not realizing they have this ability to switch, and if those things are happening to you and you're not conscious of it, or you're not aware that some people have these discussions about how the brain is working, it would be easy to think like you're going crazy and that everyone else is right and you're the one that's wrong. Oh, but
Yeah.
hey, something actually just popped up, which was in one of my DMT experiences, similarly to you, as like I started noticing higher levels of consciousness, I was like, yeah, I'd much rather be at these higher levels of consciousness. So on DMT, I had this experience with this entity. It was actually a gray alien, and the gray alien was like, hey, Seibo, like you could ask me any question that you want to ask. So I asked, what's the meaning of life? And then he was about to answer. Then I said, no, what's the meaning of the universe? And the explanation he gave me was very similar to what I just described to you, which is like, yeah, like the meaning is God rediscovering who God is through all of these individuated versions of himself. But the thing that the alien had told me was like, Seibo, like you incarnated as a physical being to do physical things. So if you spend your time trying to be like overly like spiritual and raise your consciousness all the time, well, that's actually not the point of like why you lived. He says, if you want to eat fried chicken, go fucking eat fried chicken. Go have sex with your wife more. Like he's like, we don't have sex. We could just procreate, like, just if we want a baby, here's a baby, just procreate. And then the funniest thing he said is like, you know what? If you get into a fist fight, that's not the worst thing either. He goes, just enjoy the physicality, and it was like a great reminder that, yeah, we chose to incarnate as physical beings. It might seem better what they're doing, but what's communicated to me was there's no like, that's more spiritual than what we're doing. Doing physical things is just as spiritual. It's our interpretation of it. So if you could just know that living a physical life is just as spiritual as living an energetic life, then just enjoy your time. There's only the present moment. The present moment is the most important time. So be as joyous and as happy as you can, enjoying this physical 3D experience.
Yeah. And I mean, the physical 3D experience is only going to last so long. And then after that, you're going to return back into the sea of an eternal being. So savor it while it's here.
Yep.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're almost at like 2 hours. So how you feeling? You got your lunch there, right? So
yeah, I got my lunch. My 3D space-time wife knows that I had a hungry stomach.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, let's see. I think that was a lot of fun for me personally.
Oh, it was a lot of fun for me too. I mean, like some of this, like I share a lot of like manifestation and some spirituality on my channel. I don't talk about as much about like the aliens and how time travel and all of this stuff works. You know, like I try to keep it kind of in the realm of quantum physics, but this was really fun to talk about because at the end of the day, like I know it's true, but having someone like you ask me these questions, having someone that is open to it or actually agrees with me, you know, it just allows the information to flow out more easy. You know, like I told Theo some of these things and I could just see him go, oh, all right, dude. Like, well, you don't seem like a dangerous guy, but this is some like out there shit, you know, especially when I start mentioning like the Arcturians or the Galactic Federation or, you know, why the reptilians are trying to suppress our consciousness. Like I know firsthand, like this stuff could just sound like, like, yeah, that guy trains that 10th planet for sure. You know, like,
That people
but
will definitely make that generalization, I'm sure.
yeah. But, you know, like I said, I mean, when I was actively training at 10th Planet, I was really actually not, I didn't believe too many conspiracy theories, and nor do I would say like believe a lot of them now, but in the everything everywhere all at once principle, like I know that like in some reality, these conspiracies have all happened. And, you know, at least for me, like a lot of what I shared, because I didn't read it in a book or on the internet or listen to it on a podcast, you know, I just say, well, that's what was told to me in the meditation and you know, just kind of take it or leave it. But having you ask me those questions and be open to them, or not just open, but like feeling like, yeah, I love this information. It's just allowed that connection to whatever was telling me to say that thing, just like flow out in like the most natural way that it's ever come out of my mouth. Because when someone's skeptical about it, like I like that, like my connection to that breaks. And then all of a sudden I'm like, you know, stuttering and then you know, getting desperate to like look for words and they're just not coming. And so I really appreciated, you know, the time that we spent together to really allow me to transmit a lot of that information that quite honestly, I haven't said like outside of, you know, like my house, you know.
Cool. Yeah, that's sweet. That's totally welcome. And I'm sure a lot of people will be like, what? Reptilians? Like, but that's okay because it's all about appreciating that everyone has a different perspective and we all know different things. And I mean, like when I was like 16 or 17 or something, had a UFO experience. And so I'm just like, okay, well, the mind is open to that. Anything's possible. So yeah, thank you so much. I've contacted one of the girls that was with me because I want to get her on the podcast and we can actually tell the story together.
Ooh.
Yeah. There was three of us there. I don't know if we'll see. Ideally, it'd be great to get all three because then we can like tell the story and compare how we remember it differently and fill in the blanks and then just talk about like, you know, more alien stuff. And I'll have lots of information to tell them now.
Well, you know the formula. You know the formula.
Yeah.
Quantum shift into that reality where all three of you guys are on there and then just be unattached to it. And I believe high likelihood that it's going to manifest that way.
Oh, yeah. All right. Okay. So do you want to tell people where they can find you? And yeah, just one last little tidbit of information. You know what I like to do? Tim Ferriss on his podcast, he asks people to share if they can make a billboard with one message for everyone to see, what would it be?
Yeah, absolutely. So you could find me at I have so many TikTok channels and Instagram channels, but the one that you should go to is I Am Abundance Coach. So I Am Abundance Coach. You could find me on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok with that handle. Actually, I won't tell that story because it's too long. But if I was on a billboard, if I had a billboard and I could say anything, is that this is what I would tell people. When you hear something and it resonates with you, that's your body's way, that's your spirit's way of letting you know that information is for you. Otherwise, it wouldn't resonate. And so what I like to tell people is whatever you heard from me, whatever resonated with you, whatever you disagreed with, that's all okay. Just take what works and whatever doesn't resonate with you, don't use it. You know, just like jujitsu, take what works you don't need to learn an Imanari roll if that's not in your game, but it looks cool. If it doesn't work for you, just take it out of your game. If you're just like a arm bar, triangle, rear naked choke type of person, like those are perfectly okay. So that's my best advice is like, yeah, when you hear something that resonates with you, understand that that resonation or the reason it resonates is because it's in alignment with your soul. And if it doesn't, don't worry. And don't really worry about who the messenger is, because I know I said a lot of things that probably sounded very scientific. Then I went down this other rabbit hole that was like, does this guy even know about science? Let me double fact check all this stuff that he said about quantum physics. And so what I'm saying is the parts that resonated with you, use them. The parts that didn't, no big deal. And don't worry about who the messenger is, because everyone has great shit to say. And then everyone has like, some bullshit that they say. And I'm no different. So take what works and then just discard what doesn't resonate. And that's the message that I would like to leave people.
All right. Amazing. Thank you, Seibo. Thank you for being
You
here for
are
the
welcome.
love of life. Cool.
The love of life.
That's right. All right. So say your Instagram handle one more time.
I am abundance coach.
You got it. And then I'll link all your other things that are posted on your Instagram or your website on the bio.
Yeah. Hey, actually kind of interesting story is, like I was saying, like I kind of stay away from stuff that might be a little bit weird, but dude, I've been creating like TikTok videos for the last 16 months, and quantum shifting was one that I wanted to create for a while, but I just thought that might be like over the top. And so my videos hover between like 200 to 500 views, sometimes like a couple thousand every once in a while. But my quantum shifting video, it's like at like 180,000 views, and so what it kind of taught me was like I wasn't being as forthcoming with my knowledge. I was withholding stuff. So it was just like, like it just reminded me like, just stay in that vessel mode. Don't be too concerned. There's definitely I mean, when I read the comments, I was like, man, there's definitely a lot of people that think I'm a bullshitter. But at the end of the day, that same message that I left, which was like, yeah, if it works for you, take it. If it doesn't. So that's also some advice that I'm giving for myself where, like I said, I didn't share a lot of this information ever, outside of this podcast. So now I'm feeling a lot more empowered to talk about it. And so thank you for that.
Cool. Thank you. Happy to be of service for that. That's cool. Yeah. The world needs our weird, and what you just said actually, when you have that pull, that desire to share something, and then your human gets in the way, your inner critic goes, yeah, that may be a bit much for people. People might not be ready for that. Which inner critic would that be? That would be the doubter.
Let me see. Wait, explain that one more time.
The one who tries to override the voice of spirit and says, no, too weird. The people don't want it. They're not ready.
I believe that would be the controller.
Yeah, that pesky little rascal.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been really inspiring for me, and give me a lot to consider.
Let's keep in touch for sure. Let's keep in touch. I really love speaking with you, and I would love to continue exploring wherever we go together.
Yeah. And you got to tell me what they tell you about what happens when we get to 5D.
Dude, I'm surprised I didn't ask that question. I'm usually like super curious. It's like, like it's like, asking ChatGPT for answers.
Yeah, you just needed another perspective, and here it is.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you.
All right. You take care.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.